Welcome back to the SuperCoach Hub Classic AFL podcast. Now today, I'm your host. You guys all know me, Scobie_SuperCoach Hub. Firstly, we have a very, very prominent figure in the fantasy football community. If you don't know who Jaden Popowski is, you're either living under a rock or your fantasy information has been misguided. This fella knows absolutely everything there is to know, whether it's about fantasy, the AFL fantasy game, or SuperCoach. Jaden, thank you so much, mate, for joining us today. How are you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, mate. Going well. It's been a great season so far, and there's plenty of insights that I've been trying to work with so far this year. And it's not really showing on my rankings yet, but hopefully I get there. It's all about learning at this point.
No, I completely echo your thoughts, mate. I'm not traveling as well as I would have liked to have been. But firstly, just want to let everybody know on the audio all the work that you've done. Now, Jaden's handle on Twitter is at Jaiden_Popowski. Surely you would have seen him floating around. He's got literally almost, I think it's 9,000 followers off the top of my head. I'm not too sure. I'm sure that'll trend upwards as the season keeps going on. But this is the fella that basically has broken the SuperCoach algorithm down, the scoring for it, which is so much more complex than AFL fantasy. Not to poo-poo on their game, but we all know sometimes, hang on, our players played a little bit better than what we thought they've done. Why is their scoring not up to what we, I guess, perceive it to be? Jaden's broken all that down. Like this, it's incredible what he's done. Additionally, latest DPPs, there's possession points. Go to his Twitter handle, go to his website, and you will get lost in just absolute, pure, beautiful data that will enhance your fantasy and SuperCoach, I guess, experience. But from now on, I'm going to shut up a little bit, mate, because I want to hear the story. How did you get stuck into, I guess, the world of fantasy football, AFL, so to speak, AFL fantasy, and obviously AFL SuperCoach, mate?
Yeah, cool. Thanks for that introduction. I guess it started off fairly young. I was probably like 8 or 9 years old, and my dad introduced me to the great player that was Dane Swan and his fantasy capabilities. So, and as a Pies fan, I love that I could just pick him easily. So, once you've got one player, then you need to pick the rest of your team. So I started off playing fantasy like that, and that was really fun. And to be honest, like, it was fairly advanced. We're both very mathsy people, so he was happy to talk about what a break even is before I'd even gotten out of Velcro shoes. But so there was plenty of parts moving in my head at that point. I didn't play too much in the years to follow, but once I in the last few years really taken a bit more serious, once I've got a bit of statistics training, which came from uni, and to be honest, actually mainly like programming experience, starting off in that. I knew it'd be something I would like, but I never had the chance to do it. And then, once it started, then I guess I can say I'm a statistical programmer, to be honest, which is really fun because you can automate so many cool things like the SuperCoach scoring system, and also just coming up with more advanced things than what you would see anywhere else, I guess.
So basically, when I select a player that I think is going to go 130 on a Sunday Arvo and they pump out a measly 75, you're the person that can tell me that score is actually correct and I'm not just, I guess, overselling and leading into the hype. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's kind of the goal of it. I guess I haven't played SuperCoach very seriously. I played it throughout high school with mates, but I never really understood it enough. And the frustrating thing about it was, like, now I have a good understanding of stats and analysis, but I was frustrated by the amount of information that's out there for SuperCoach, especially for the more casual coach. I guess it's not that casual, but it does feel like you don't get a lot of information about how the game works, which I kind of wanted to break down the barrier, because ultimately I'm a coach myself. So everything you'll see that I post is actually just me answering my own questions. And it turns out that goes all right for everyone else's team as well. But that's my philosophy. Like, I'm making the kind of content that I would want to see. And that's really fun, because I have the technical nous to be able to do that now, which I didn't have. So yeah, the last 2 years I've been just doing this and getting better. Like, you just learn something new every day, and it helps a lot with the SuperCoach teams.
Completely agree, mate. And I think you actually echo a few of my thoughts as well. Recently, I've worked out how to always had, I guess, a little bit of understanding regarding price projections in SuperCoach, but working out the break evens, that took a couple of days with a lot of trial and error. And now that I've, I guess, worked out how to do that, so to speak, it's very interesting the amount of information that is on, I guess, the SuperCoach website, yet most people don't have access to, because they either, I guess, their financial situation doesn't allow them to pay for gold, or they just don't want to. They don't want to support the Herald Sun, and that's their prerogative, whatever it might be. But I've always been a firm believer of your financial situation shouldn't affect your ability to make informed decisions regarding SuperCoach. And when I say informed decisions, not something simple like Brodie Grundy has a bye next week, should I trade him to Tim English? Something like that, where it's largely team dependent and opinion based. But so to speak, if we're looking down, if player X scores 70 this week, what's their break even next week? Do I hold on to them for, say, the next month, or should I be looking to ship them out? So kind of like you trying to bridge the gap, I guess, between people that, whatever their reason is for not wanting to do that, as in pay for SuperCoach Gold, but just allowing them, I guess, a little bit more knowledge to better themselves, because at the end of the day, we're trying to do our best to form a community and be active in it, and I think it's a great way to interact with other people. I will ask you about, now this has just baffled me. I actually sent you a tweet out last night, because there was a certain account, we won't name names, that posted there, I think off the top of my head, there's 35 players coming up that will be changed or attain DPP. So they'll be getting a new position. And as we know, whatever happens in AFL fantasy, I think it's a fair statement to say that 99.9999 reoccurring percent will happen in SuperCoach. When I saw this tweet, I was intrigued at first, because I wanted to know who was on there, on the list, for my own benefit. But I just felt, well, if we know how many people are going to be on it, why don't we have a list? And I thought, surely there's one person that would know it, and that person obviously happened to be you. And I don't know how you did it, mate, but it looks to be absolutely bang on. I'm looking at it right now. And feel free to not elaborate, but how on earth do you get the data or understand it, and then, I guess, produce an informed decision that basically is the exact same as what certain people who are, I guess, getting paid to endorse SuperCoach, you have the same ideas and same lists? How did that come about, mate?
Well, yeah, in terms of the DPPs, like, I've been tracking them for a few weeks now, so it's not a one-off post, but yeah, I guess that other subsequent tweet kind of just confirmed what I already knew, so that was it's obviously great. I really like to absorb information like that and then compare to what I'm doing. It's kind of the same with the SuperCoach scoring system. Like, you see scores that are 70 and you think, oh, that was at least 100, and then you can actually explain why. So it's kind of that same idea of breaking down the gap between raw numbers and data and then the actual analysis of it. So that's kind of, I guess, what I'm doing. For the DPPs, it's not actually going to be spot on because I don't have any numbers at all. But the way I did it was just compare that position in SuperCoach to the position that they've been allocated this season only. So based on their positional status this year, you can do that. You can go in the AFL app and click on a player, and it will say that position. So it's just simply compiling that, and turns out it lined up fairly nicely. So yeah, there was, in terms of my post, there was 39 players that have a complete change. So that's something like Tom Powell, who's a forward only, and now this season he's playing as a mid only. So that's a very obvious change. There's other ones like Riley Sanders, who is a mid, but this year he's been split as a mid forward, and they actually do have a specific position category called mid forward. So he's kind of on the brink there somewhere, but we'll never really know.
And that's so unfortunate. It really is. It really is.
Yeah. So what I'm doing is just kind of giving an indication as to the names you might expect to be on there. But yeah, like it's nothing official. I'm just trying to break down that kind of gap between the top and then everyone else down the bottom. So I'm not trying to do anything like tricky or anything. All this was compiling that new position that they've been allocated this year, and comparing it to what they've got in SuperCoach. So there's certainly some good names on there, and hopefully it gives people a bit of an idea.
I mean, top left, looking at him right now, Nick Martin is coming into my team this week in SuperCoach. I just think it would have taken you such a long time to go through and obviously, firstly, set up what position they are. And obviously, it's so easy just to type a name in, but you need to scrape that data. You've got to get the position and then obviously what it may be changed into. And I'm sure there was a few players where you may have had an inkling or thought that, hey, this midfielder is, I'm fairly sure he's going to be a defender. And then once you looked into it a little bit more, that maybe didn't come to fruition. Is that fair as well?
Yeah, so because I've been tracking it over the last few weeks, there's been changes every week. So a few examples were like Jason Horne-Francis was classified as a mid forward after round one. And when I looked at that, I was a little bit confused. Well, not too much, but a lot of people were confused because he had 71% centre bounces in the first game, and people were thinking 71 plus 35, that's over 100. It doesn't make any sense. So you need the 35% to get forward status. So it doesn't make any sense for him to be a mid forward. He's now lost that mid forward classification after a massive game in the midfield last weekend, but
so unfortunate. Yes.
Yeah, he could get it back this week, but just tracking those changes each week is really good. And to be honest, this is just all automated, so there's no like me putting in certain players that I have in my own team and excluding players that are in people's other teams. Like, it's not like Horne-Francis is a mid forward and I'm just keeping it a secret.
Of course.
And yeah, that's why I think my content is, fairly easy, because all I'm doing is making data easier to process. And yeah, that's what it's all about, I guess.
That's immense. Now, I want to move on to, we'll try and keep it short and sharp because obviously value your time, and we did this at such short notice, so we'll try and obviously not have ramifications on the rest of the day. The one that literally I am mind-boggled about, and I've probably read this thread, 6 or 7 times, and each time I read it, I get a little bit more of an understanding of how this has come about. Talk me through how you explain the SuperCoach scoring system, because I learned 2.5, 3 years ago that a clearance isn't a SuperCoach statistic. So when you hear, someone has 20 clearances, well, that's fantastic for their game. But it's obviously, what are they doing after the clearance? Is it a handball? Is it a kick? Are they hitting a target? What's going on there? So, mate, the floor is yours. How did you crack the SuperCoach scoring system?
Yeah, so it was a pretty fun little task. and I guess I might actually just share it if that's all right.
Mate,
to the
absolutely.
screen. But
Absolutely. For everyone
So,
that's on the audio, I plan to have this up on YouTube as soon as possible. My technological skills aren't the best, so just wait a little bit. But Jaden, go for it, mate.
Yeah, so like as I said before, I like to think of myself as a pretty rookie SuperCoach player. Never really taken it that serious, and obviously never done that well because of that. But like, if I'm wanting to get better at the game, I probably wanted to have a better understanding of how it's scored, and like why certain things happen and why certain things don't. So yeah, this was a long time question that I had. I tried something similar to this last year. It didn't really have that good of a result because essentially what I did last year was we get little snippets of information from official sources that say things like a goal is worth 8 and a tackle is worth 4. And that's amazing, but it doesn't actually make a lot of sense because I know a lot of people sit at home and they watch their scores tick up and they think, hang on, he just got a tackle and he only got 2 points for it. So what's going on there?
Absolutely. Yep.
There's too many conspiracy theories out there. Like people get absolutely upset about it, even though it's 100% accurate. They just don't understand it, and we don't get any information about it. So we can't ever like actually make informed decisions. All we can do is blame the data capturers, but they're doing an amazing job. So it's actually more of an information type thing.
With the lack of communication there, like you think the amount of times you've heard it, he's only scoring well because the blokes at Champion Data have just brought him into their team this week. It's like, well, clear, like say that again, say it out loud, and how idiotic that sounds. But I can understand why people say it because there is no communication, there is no like I guess scenario based where you can go into a website and actually understand it.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's something that I was frustrated with myself. So this is where this kind of project came from. As I said, I did it last year, but I used the values, what they provide, and they say a tackle's worth 4 and a goal is worth 8. So if you sub all of those in and you go, hang on, all the players are averaging 140 and it doesn't make a lot of sense. So essentially what was going on was all the players were getting scaled down by 20 points per game because there was too many points to go around. So this year I went a bit harder. I got a lot more stats and kind of let the computer solve the equation instead of subbing in that I think a goal is 8 and I think a tackle is 4. Instead, I just let the computer decide what each value was worth. So I guess I can kind of take you through it a little bit. To get more advanced stats, you can watch player highlights in the AFL app. And I love this highlight as a Pies fan.
Mate, you preaching to the choir. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you can kind of get a bit of like data that's in order, if that makes sense. So you can see like Hoskin Elliott's had a contested possession here, and then he kicks it effectively. So, but then I think the kick is also smothered. So you suddenly get an idea of everything happening in order. And while we don't have particular specific breakdowns of saying Hoskin Elliott did this exactly, because there's so many things a player can do on the field, you can kind of just create the story by looking at all the stats in order.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I did. And with this model, so last year it was 90% accurate. And as I said, that's after all the scores get brought down by 20. It just wasn't interpretable. And that's what frustrates me about the communication with this is what certain stats are worth, because it doesn't line up. It doesn't make any sense. And that's why people get frustrated, because there's no actual nuance to the conversation other than this is what we put into it. And then you just have to believe it exists instead of saying this is what the average one actually is. So that was the goal of this. Come up with like what the average kick is worth, what the average handball is worth, what the average smother is worth, so that when you see one on the field, you can say, this is actually what I saw, and this is how much their score went up by. So on average, a kick is worth this much, things like that.
That's I mean, I have no idea the amount of time and effort that you've put into this, but that's insane.
Yeah, so and things like this. So you've got disposals. So a lot of the information in terms of this section was like I had to browse different things like on Twitter, on online forums, on glossaries and things like that to try and come up with an idea of what might be included. And then essentially once I had as many stats as I could possibly find, then I was like, okay, well, now everything's in order and I can calculate everything. And then using the score that people actually got, I can say, here's that stat line. What do you expect the score to be? Like, how close can you get to the actual score across every single player's score? Like, how close can you get to that? So things like, I think we've heard that a contested intercept mark is worth like 8 points or something like that is the typical community know-how. But if we actually look at breaking it down by the zone, which is actually really important because D50 and forward 50 stats are worth around 20% more than the same stat if it's inside the midfield. You get an idea of like if it's in the midfield, it's only 5.8. So you could be saying Darcy Moore's had 10 intercept marks. Why did he only score 65? So
they've all been taken in the midfield rather than, as you just said, different zones.
Yeah, so there are a few examples recently, like Buku Karmas, who took like 7 intercept marks, I think, but like they were nearly all uncontested, which are worth like way less than a contested intercept mark. So we don't have that breakdown anywhere. Like you have to kind of come up with that yourself, and you know when you're watching along that that's what it comes out to be. So yeah, there's a whole bunch in here. I think there's 157 stats that are weighted in this, and
wow,
yeah, so you can, and then there's a lot that eventually what you can do is remove stats from the entire model that aren't actually contributing anything to it. So things like hit outs, if like the computer says a hit out is worth 0.001, you think, well, that's probably not right. There's no point having it at all. Same with like ineffective kicks or handballs, clearances, as you mentioned earlier, inside 50s. So there's just so many things like that once you explain everything else, then all of a sudden you don't need those anymore and they aren't actually relevant. So it was kind of a bit of a reverse engineering type model where I train everything based on the scores we've seen and then everything gets weighted like that. So the average 50-meter penalty is minus 6.3 instead of like saying a lot of these stats are actually a little bit lower than what you've probably heard before, but that's because, like I said, if you actually sub in the actual value, what you hear all the time, you just get way too many points and it doesn't make any sense.
And I think that's that's another area as well, especially with scaling also. Now, I haven't spoken to you about this. Do you have any idea how scaling works, so to speak? Because what you've just explained is super complex in itself, because I remember seeing a graphic, and it might be on the SuperCoach website, I'm not too sure, but I think there's like 20 categories and it's basically, kick is worth X, handball is X. You've just said that there's 157 of them. So right then and there, I can make the conclusion that this graphic that I've seen, yes, it might be semi-accurate, but it's very misleading. So my question to you is, how does scaling work? Now, that might seem very simple, but if, for instance, I know the other week Fife got subbed, he was on 66, yet scaled up to 69 and finished the game there. And obviously, he's not on the field. We all know what a sub is. He's on the bench doing whatever, eating lollies, icing hammies, whatever it might be. How does scaling work?
Yeah, so in terms of this model, I guess the idea was I want to come up with what the average stat is worth across an entire game, regardless of when it happens. But as you say, there is even more advanced stuff to do with the SuperCoach system, I guess the first one to keep in mind is the 3,300 rule. So every single game adds up to 3,300 total points, which is exactly what I used in this as well, and exactly why when you use those table of 20 official stats on the site that say everything's worth this, everything's way overblown. Like nothing meets the 3,300 rule. It all needs to be brought back down. So I guess that's why a lot of my stat values are slightly lower, because they are incorporating the 3,300 rule already. And then there's also the idea of saying when all the games are worth 3,300, but sometimes games are won in the first quarter, and sometimes there's a kick after the siren to win the game right at the end. And obviously that's going to be worth a lot because you've completely swung the result of the game. So in terms of my model here, I'm not incorporating that at all, because if you think about the 3,300 rule, you could say, well, let's scale everything up by double at the end, because then it was a close game. So we want everything to be doubled at the end. But then the 3,300 rule is like, oh, okay, we're going to bring everything back down because it's over 3,300 now. So it all kind of works a little bit together. But in terms of that 5 example, you can see why the game can be closer at the end. So then more points are allocated there. It's actually not as extreme as what you think, and that's kind of the takeaway that I got from this, because I'm not using any of that whatsoever. I'm also missing some stats that are not included because they're just impossible to figure out. Things mainly to do with pressure and tackling, and Harley Reid breaking tackles as well, I think probably in there. But that's just impossible to know because, you know, if you don't get a tackle, then how do you know that one's happened? So things like that. But I'm 97% accurate already, and I am missing some stats, and I'm not adjusting for the state of the game. So it probably doesn't actually have that big of an effect as what you might have first thought.
I'm just looking at what you've put up for, you referenced it before, Buku Kamas's 53 SuperCoach points. Now, keep in mind, this was, I think you tweeted this out 2 days ago. Yeah, chuck it up, mate. Go for it.
Yeah.
This is obviously using your model. Is this
correct?
Did your model align correctly with his score?
So in terms of Booker's, yes, pretty close. There was also down the bottom, it was a fairly high stat match, and most players were about 2 points over what they were expected to score. So in terms of my model, like I've just created a stat value for everything based on the last years and calibrated it all. And then I can compare that to what we're seeing now. It's fairly similar. And I know that every player was scaled down a bit. So that's where the kind of 2 match scaling points down the bottom here come from. But then everything else is essentially just a rounded version of everything on my website. And also in this, you've got to consider that like the marks in the zone as well. So this contested intercept mark was clearly in defensive 50 because it's worth so much. But then having 5 only worth 15 that were uncontested probably indicates they were more in the midfield.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of Booker, yes, his score was actually pretty solid. It was more to do with the fact that the intercept marks, what you might expect to be worth more, they're actually uncontested. So there wasn't any of that. Another example recently was Tom Powell. So
I am so glad you brought this up because I was going to reference this as well because and don't get me wrong, I know he didn't have the best game, but 73 seemed unders, and that's just because, I guess, the lack of communication. Like you literally just stated before, that just because you take a contested intercept mark, doesn't mean if you take it in defensive 50, forward 50, or in the middle of the ground, it's weighted the exact same. So
Yeah.
go for it, mate. I'm really excited to hear this explanation.
Yeah. So in terms of the Tom Powell example, I just noticed I've actually got a typo. This should actually be, I don't know why a clanger handball is -6 here, but it's definitely not that.
Yep.
I guess in terms of the game against Brisbane, it was over very quickly. So Tom
Absolutely.
Powell did a fair bit at the start, and then he kind of faded away a little bit. He had 10 tackles at halftime, I think.
Yes. Yeah, he was. That's all he was doing. He was just hugging. He wasn't even getting the pill.
So if you add up all his stats using my model that's trained on the last few years, his stat line suggests that he would have scored 79. So that's a bit of an idea as to the fact that that's how well he played based on every game that's happened in the past. But this game was a blowout. So a lot of those stuff he did early in the game, not going to be scored as well. They are going to be scored better. But then if he's getting these possessions that he was getting later in the game, like if he was only tackling at the start and now he's getting possessions at the end, those possessions aren't going to be really worth as much.
Absolutely.
So that's why he's kind of 6 points unders, you can say, when it comes to why did he only score 73? You're saying he should score 79 in a normal game. That's where the kind of match scaling comes in. So there's things like that you kind of need to understand as well. But the overall, it's generally pretty close. But I guess what I'm trying to do also is say that, this is what he expected to score, but due to the actual game, this is what he did score. So once you understand most of the parts, you can actually say the remainder has to be from the blowout nature of the game, which I think is really cool.
Yep. No, that's fantastic. We've been on for half an hour, man, and we've covered some wonderful points. Just want to throw a few statements at you, and you can agree or disagree. Obviously, that large bag of cash that I'll have sent to your house may not actually be there if you do disagree. But is it fair to say that there needs to be more communication regarding scoring to not even just the average or the casual player of SuperCoach, but just to, I guess, everyone that signs up, so to speak? Should there be an option to, and I'm not talking something as detailed as your model, but should there be something like a simple explanation, how you've explained it multiple times and through so many different avenues in the 32 minutes that we've been going on? Contested defensive marks are worth more than intercept marks are worth more than if they were taken in the middle of the ground. Should something as simple like that, should that be an extra page on the SuperCoach app where you can just look at it and it'll show up?
Yeah, so you did mention like the little table that they have in, I think it's in the T's and C's or something that people love to quote. And it gives you some values. And I don't think they're wrong because essentially what we know is every single stat gets weighted. Like we can say a contested intercept mark is worth 8, and that could be what they use, but then everything gets brought down or brought up based on what actually happened in the entire game. So it might not make sense, but that could be what they actually use to start off with. So I don't think they're necessarily I think that's still right, but it's not useful. So there's a lot of that I think that's going on. Like they're happy to, I think generally in terms of across fantasy AFL, there's a lot of things that people say that are correct and right, but they're not useful. So that's kind of where I'm kind of trying to be in the middle of saying, like, I have the skills to be able to work with large data, but I want to also break it down so it's more useful for the average coach. So we don't really get a lot of that. And that's kind of exactly why I started what I was doing 2 years ago, because there is that kind of gap where you need more explanation these days than maybe what you did a few years ago. So I guess to answer the question, there's probably not a lot that they would put on there because they're probably still telling the truth, but it's just not useful. So if you add a couple more, or they have done it in the past where they explain things in a bit more detail, and that actually well informed the types of things that I needed to put into my model. But yeah, I guess overall, like they're giving us the basics, which is fine, but it maybe creates more problems than answers, if that makes sense. So we need to make sure we're getting informed. Like, don't put something there that's not informative, because then we get so many things all over social media about my player didn't get this and my player didn't get this. What's going on? I think it maybe just creates a few more problems than they need to create.
Yeah. I mean, you obviously understand it and know a lot more than I. I think it's a little bit misleading, so to speak. But obviously, if as you said, your model's using 157 of them, and there's obviously 157 variables, and there's more that potentially could be used, it's a bit hard to put it into a little table.
Yeah.
But obviously, I think there should be maybe an avenue for some communication, or even a little extra page on the website where just the transparency is there. That would be fantastic, in my opinion. But mate, from everyone at the SuperCoach Hub, I know we organise this on such short notice. Thank you so much for jumping on. And again, the floor is yours. Where can people find you on socials? Pump the website, mate. Whatever else you're on, where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And it's nice to be able to talk through some stuff, just because I do spend a lot of time programming things. So when I see things like this come into fruition, it's actually really good, because it means I can talk through what I've been doing and be able to explain it in more detail than what I can on Twitter, say, for example. But I still
is it 180 characters or 160, whatever it might be?
I tell you what, it is an issue that I deal with a lot, trying to fit things in. Like, I think every single tweet I have to trim a little bit. But speaking of Twitter, you can find me over there. That's the main one, at Jaiden _Popowski. And then Instagram as well, stats by Jaden. And then there's also my website, which that article was on, statsbyjaden.com.au. I'm trying to get that nice and populated. It is a kind of newer project that I kind of had to do because I needed somewhere to post this SuperCoach scoring article. So yeah, there's a few things on there, things to do with it's like SuperCoach in general. So I've been working a little bit on things, like I've just shared it if it's coming up, but
it will in 2 seconds. Here we go.
There it is. So things like this. So just some like leaderboards as to how players are scoring. So like Matt Rao is clearly the number one possession player in the comp at the moment, and that's why he's averaging 130. And the same with Sarong and Green. They're just getting so many possessions, so many contested. But then someone like Luke Ryan scoring well out of the back half. So this is something that I update on my website. You can come over and have a look at how different players are scoring, just things like that. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
And also, it's not just confined to SuperCoach either. I see you do a lot, and when I say a lot, I don't say it lightly. You do an absolute shit ton of content for SuperCoach and fantasy. That's a fair statement, isn't it, mate?
Yeah, I've been trying to get into the SuperCoach a bit more because it is a very interesting game, and there's a lot of misunderstanding, which is why I kind of have stayed away from it. But the more that I can explain, the easier it makes the game for me. And like, if I can make the game easier for myself, then it turns out that goes all right with other people as well. So that's kind of where I'm at. But yeah, I do a lot of fantasy stuff as well. Obviously, it helps because the scoring system is more simple, and we already know how it works. So I guess I'm a bit more advanced in that section because I've been working with that scoring system for longer. But that is somewhere I want to get to with SuperCoach as well. Once I get a bit more of the scoring system down and things like that. But yeah, with fantasy, I'm working on things that are pretty advanced, like breaking down whether a player is scoring from stoppages or while the ball is in transition, things like that. So yeah, I'm always trying to advance things, and I don't want to get stuck in the mud and like keep talking about the same things. So I guess that's why you should follow me. I guess I don't really post the same things over and over, but I'll always find something interesting, hopefully.
No, as I said at the start, mate, unless you've been living under a rock or you don't want valuable information that will, I guess, guide you in the right way of selecting certain players for either fantasy or SuperCoach, then you probably haven't been following you. So I highly suggest all the listeners and people that may be watching this later on to go and follow Jaden. We're going to wrap that up right then and there because that was absolutely fantastic, mate. Again, thank you so much for jumping on. Everyone, you can find me on X at Scobie_SC Hub. Jaden, we know to find you on X at Jaiden_Popowski. Thank you so much to our sponsor for today, Honeyball. Drop them a DM, get into the chats. They have wonderful statistics going on there. They have updated injury lists. You've got quotes straight from presses, everything you need. Wonderful environment. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube. We've also got a TikTok up and about. You can follow us there at SC Hub AFL, just for some bite-sized content as well. Jump in the Discord, like on Facebook, Instagram, Linktree, everything's in the bio. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. And again, thank you so much for joining us, Jaden. That's it for us. Thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and enjoy the listen wherever you may be listening from.